Okay, so in the client folder, a React application is created. So we will have two folders. One is the public folder, and other is the source folder. And there is lot of JavaScript files and CSS files were created. So what we, what happens is like so as I told you before in the index.html, right, this div tag only we are going to update. Okay, so let's remove all the code and let's code freshly. I will do remove all the code, shift to one exclamation mark, and I put enter, and I get a new set of thing. Now I will create a div tag here, and in that the id should be root. Id is root. Okay, this is the only tag is important. The title around I will change to CRUD. Okay. Okay. So and other files and all is not required, right? We are not using any of these files, right? So let me delete all these files, and we will have only index.html here. Okay. So index.html is done. Now, now what we'll do is let's go over the existing code, right? And then we will try to um, code a few things in a one stage. Okay, so in this source folder, we'll have index.js. So in the index.js, what you need to do, you need to basically, I think this will all be there. You need to basically call a component app component. Okay, that app component, you have the app component is part of the info folder. So in the current directory info folder, we have to import app. So in the info folder app component, this is the app component. This you have to export it, right? So export default app. Only if you export, you can import it. So this is a one thing you have to implement here. And in this component, we are using info form and info table component, which has to be imported here. And we use AxiOS. So to send HTTP request to the backend, so we have to import AxiOS. Okay. And then here we use state and use effect hook. So you have to, from React, you have to import React, and this both the hooks has to be imported. So this is what is a major thing in the front end, right? Um, okay, so let's try to again. So your info form component, right? So here you are under under a particular div tag you are calling the info form, and under the particular div tag you are calling info table. Okay, the reason why you are using this different div is, I think column -3 is used here, and column -9 is used here, right? Which means that three columns are used allocated for this info form, and three columns or 9 columns are allocated for table component, right? So that right in your page, if you see a React application, this is kind of 3 columns are allocated, and totally there are 12 columns, right? So 3 is allocated for this, and 9 is allocated for a table component. So
One
here
row contains 12 columns.
Okay, here we have uh, we are calling two components here. Both the components are in separate div tag. As I told you, each row has 12 columns. In that, 3 columns is allocated for info form component, and 9 columns is allocated for info table component, right? And then all these both the components are part of a particular div tag, which is a row, and then the complete elements comes inside a container, and the complete elements is on margin top 4. So you will have 4 margin top. This space will be 4. Okay, this space is 4, and that is how this is the complete HTML content is what returned by the app component, right? So from here we are calling info form component, And so in the while calling the info form component, right, we are giving a callback, right? Create callback is given. So in the info form component, they will call props dot my data. So when they call props dot my data, this create function will be called. Okay. So when you go into the info form component, right, so it will give you the form, right? It will have the HTML content for the form, right? The complete form. And then what happens is, when you click the submit button, right, it gives a button and all. When you click the submit button, the info submit function will be called. So in the info submit function, you will the info submit function, you will basically call the props.mydata. Okay, when you call the props.mydata, the create function will be called. So the create function, what it does, the info form, you are filling the form, and then you are collecting all the data in the form, you are putting in one variable, and this function is called with the data. So all the data entered in the form is now available in this variable data, right? And then we are sending a post request, and you are sending a post request to a backend server 5000, and the route is info create student, and the data is passed. Now this data will be updated in the database, and then when it comes back, we are just displaying creation, and then we are again getting all the information from the database. See, once the database is updated, we call the get all function. The get all function gets all the information from the database using the get request, and it updates the state variable data. Okay, so the state variable data is an array of all the students. Okay, so this is what is the info form component does. Okay, and the info table component just displays a table. It goes, this data is there, right? So the info table component, right, is nothing, right? It gets a data. Okay, it what the update does. Okay, I think delete. See, this two things are to the info table component. Basically, what it has to do, it has to display all the data, correct? And then there is one edit button and there is one delete button. Okay, so in the info table component, it gets the data. The data is updated every time, right? This data is nothing but a state variable. Whenever you update anything here, right, the data is getting updated. When you fill the form, right, when you do create, what happens, you send a post request, and then after the post request, you do a get all. In the get all, you are updating your data state variable. So data state variable is updated also in use effect. In the use effect, right? So use effect, there are two argument, right? One argument is one function. This is one function, and second argument is a dependency. So this function will be, so the dependency is null. So this function will be called for the first render. So when you call for the first render, right, you are getting all the information in the database that time itself. Get all just gets all the information in the database and then updates the state variable. So your state variable contains, your state variable data contains all the information in the database. Okay. And for the info table component, you are passing the data. So in the info table component, you can loop over this data and display all the data like this. Correct? And then you have two buttons, right? When you click on edit, something has to happen. When you click on delete, something has to happen. What has to happen? You are also passing the function for that. So when you click edit, this function will be called. And when you click delete, this function will be called. Okay, so this is what is the front end part. Now let's go to the back end. We had a common look at the front end. So in the back end, right, in the index.js, okay, obviously we listen on one port number, we connect to a Mongo database, we use a try and catch block, right, and then we have to use cars for cost of resource sharing. Okay, And then we are telling Express to use this express.json, right? So basically, in the HTTP request, some data will be in the post request, right? Yes, data will be coming in the JSON format. The JSON format has to be converted to object. So we need a JSON parser for that. In the post request, how the data will be coming? It will be coming in the JSON format only, right? So that data, converting the data, parsing the data and converting the data into object, you need a JSON parser for that. So you are telling the Express to use the Express JSON parser. Okay, and we are telling a route app.view/info. Now this is a route you have to call, and we have to import .env here where you are using this is a .env, right? We are not using the .env here. Okay, process.env.mongodb. Okay, so so you have to import what all the things used. You have to import it here. Okay, so here you are for the /info. This is the route which is getting called, right? So in this route, right? So import express, and you are calling express.router is this route. Okay, so basically, right, there will be a post request coming in, right? There will be get request coming in. An appropriate function has to be called, correct? So when a post request comes, right, you have to tell Express that in the post request, if you're in the URL, if there is info create student, call this function. You have to tell Express, right? Then only Express will call our function, correct? In the backend, think about it. In the backend, we are using Express framework. Okay, so the Express framework, what is the use? We can start a web server using Express framework using the listen function, and whenever HTTP request comes, right? Okay, in the HTTP request, how it will come? It will come some endpoint will be there. Localhost :5000/info/create student will be there. So /info now call this route. In the /info, if it is create student now call this function. If it is get now call this function. Update na call this function. Delete and for the ID na call this function. This we have to tell Express before, correct? And this is the way you have to tell Express. Call Express, import Express, express.router, and then in the router, right? These functions and all is part of the controller folder. So you are importing all these functions from the controller folder. So control, see in the backend, right, that architecture we follow is the model, view, and the controller. Model basically there will be many tables, right? There will be many tables which you use, right? So model basically has a schema for the tables. So now we have only one table, right, which is a student schema, which has a name, course, email, contact. The schema is nothing but each column, right? What is the type? Is a string. Whether it is required or not, it is required. Whether it is unique or not, true. Unique true means we cannot have two rows with the same name. That is what unique true means. Okay. And course, it's a string and it is required. Email. Okay. Contact is a number. Fees is a number. So this is what is schema. Each column, what type it is, whether it's unique or not, whether it's required or not. So that is what is a schema. So basically you are exporting the model here. You are exporting the schema here. Okay, this student schema. Okay, now when you export, right, this is what a name you are given, student, right? Okay, a collection under the name students will be created with this schema. Collection is what is a table. Okay, so that is part of the model folder. So in the back end, right, there are a lot of work you need to do, correct? What is the work you need to do? When a HTTP request comes, you have to process the request. Okay, and then what you have to do? You have to create an entry in the database. For that, you need to have a model which displays these are different columns. Each column has these values. These values are string. These values are numbers. We have to define a schema for that. Okay, this set of code is in model folder. Okay, and then there is a set of code which interacts with the database directly, correct? Which has the business logic. Like you are doing your backend code for your business, right? So here, what is the business? Probably the student information. Now you are doing this backend code for a school or for a college. Okay, so in the controller, right, you will have the business logic. Okay, here you will have the function create student, get student, and this controller only will interact with the database. Okay, so when a create student comes, right, create student is nothing but an async function, right? It has both request and response. Okay, and then what you are doing is here you have to create a student. Okay, but where the data is, the data about the student's name, course, email, it's all comes in the request. Correct? So the request dot body dot name will have the name of the student. The request body course will have the course information. This all came in the HTTP request. So if you see, right, how the you are sending data from the front end in the post method. The data is sent in the JSON format. Now how the data is coming here? It is in the object format. In the request dot body name itself, you are getting data. So from the JSON format, you are able to convert the data to this format, right? For this only you need a JSON parser. Who calls this function create student? How this function is getting called? A post method is post request is coming to our backend. It's coming to the Express framework. Okay, so in the Express framework, we have told the Express to call this function, right? In the routes, right? We have told Express to call this function. We have already told Express. You remember what is a framework? Framework is basically there is a template, the code will get executed. We can go insert our function in the framework and the framework will call our function. So we similarly here we have inserted our function in the Express framework, telling the framework if there is a post HTTP method with this endpoint comes, call this function. So Express is calling create student, right? And then so this is getting called, right? Now what I'm doing, new users. What is users? Users is nothing but the model schema which we exported here, right? In the model, right, we exported here, right, this model, that is what we are importing here. So when you do a new user, right, a new row entry we are creating in the table. In the students collection, we are creating a new entry. So with all this data, so this should match your column name, right? If you go to a database, right, we go to database. So now there is no entry. We will create an entry. This column name has to be matched. Okay, we will create an entry. There is an entry already here, right? Okay, let's refresh. Okay, see, name, course, email, contact, fees, right? This is nothing but the column, right? This has to be matched here. Okay, for this is the data. For this is the data, right? And then what you are doing, we have created a entry, right? We have created a model, right? And data dot save will just save in the database. Okay, so from the request we got the data filled in the column and exported from the model, and then we call data dot save. It is now saved. After saving, what you have to do? We have to send a HTTP response back. In the response, right, there should be a status message. Whether HTTP response what 200 OK, 400 error, 404 error, and all is there, right? So in our response, we are sending status 200 OK, 200. And what data, and you have to send in the response, you can send some data also, right, in HTTP response. And we are converting this data, right, into JSON format, and we are sending in the response. Okay, so in the server side, okay, this is not server. So in the server side, right, in the client side, when we send this request, right, this is where did we call this? We are calling in the table component, right, or in the form component we are calling it, right. Okay, in the app component we call this, right. So this is where we send it, right. We send the post request, correct, and then in the response we are getting the data, right. So we are not handling it here, but we are calling we are again sending a get request to get all the data. So in the get request, how we are handling in the server. So what function will be called? This get student function will be called. Okay. So what we are doing? We are just doing user is already imported. User.find. It will give you all the data in the database. Just send a response. That's it. When you send a response, what happens? It will come to your front end, right? Get all. It will come to your front end. Okay. It will be there in the response. The response or data will have the complete data, and you are setting in the state variable. Okay, so we need to have some understanding of the front end and the back end. Just a map, right? In the front end, what you are doing, we have a info form and we have a info table component, right? Info form is used to display the form. Info table component, which will send a info table component. Basically, the data in the backend will be there in one state variable. It will loop over the state variable and display the data. That's it, right? So when we fill the form component, right? When we fill this form component, we have to send a post request. Okay. After the post request, we do a get request and update the state variable. From the state variable, we will loop and we will display here. In the info table component, we are not sending any request. Okay. So this is what is happening in the front end. So have this map. This is what you have to code. In the back end, what you have to do? You have to start the server. You have to connect to the Mongo database, and then you have to define the route. Okay. For info create student, you need to have a function create student. There you have to create an entry for the student and update the database. How you update the database? Data.save. And then for the get information, just users.find, you get all the information and then send it in the response. This is what we have to do. So have this map and then we have to start coding.